The maintenance bay of Mars Colony 7 hummed with the steady rhythm of atmospheric processors, a sound that had become as familiar to Kira Voss as her own heartbeat. She hung suspended beneath the belly of transport vessel Meridian, her hands, deep in the ship's quantum drive housing, coaxing temperamental energy conduits back to life. "Just you and me again, aren't we?" she murmured to the ship, her voice echoing in the empty bay. At 28, Kira had earned a reputation as the best Starship engineer in the outer colonies, partly due to her brilliant technical mind, but mostly because she treated every vessel like a living thing that needed understanding, rather than mere fixing. The wrench slipped from her oil-slicked fingers, clattering to the metal deck below. As she reached for her tool belt, the familiar hum of the station's power grid suddenly shifted to a higher frequency, one she'd never heard before. Every light in the maintenance bay flickered once, then died. Emergency lighting bathed everything in crimson shadows as Kira dropped from her harness, landing silently on the deck. The silence felt wrong, not just quiet, but actively muffled, as if sound itself had been dampened. She reached for her communicator, but the device was dead, its screen black and unresponsive. A new sound filled the air, a low, harmonic thrumming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The metal walls of the bay began to vibrate, in sympathy, and Kira felt the vibration in her bones, in her teeth, in the very core of her being. Then the wall dissolved. Not exploded or melted, simply ceased to exist, revealing a corridor that definitely hadn't been there moments before. The passage gleamed with an opalescent material that shifted colors like oil on water, and the air that flowed from it carried scents of ozone and something floral she couldn't identify. 3 figures emerged from the impossible corridor, moving, with fluid grace that made them seem to glide rather than walk. They were humanoid, but clearly not human, tall and ethereal, with skin that held a subtle silver luminescence and eyes that were too large, too knowing. Their clothing appeared to be grown rather than woven, conforming to their bodies like living metal. The leader stepped forward, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in Kira's chest. "Engineer Kira Voss of the Human Colony, Confederation. I am Thane of the Valari Consortium. You will come with us." It wasn't a request. Kira's hand moved instinctively to the plasma cutter on her belt, but her fingers froze halfway there. Not from fear, though she was certainly afraid, but from the intensity of Thane's gaze. His eyes were the color of burnished copper, ancient and sad, and in them she glimpsed depths of knowledge and sorrow that made her chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. "Come with you where?" she managed, proud that her voice remained steady. "To save both our peoples," Thane replied. His companions flanked him, their own copper eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "We require your assistance with a matter of dimensional navigation." Dimensional... Kira's engineering mind raced, trying to process the implications. "That's theoretical at best. The energy requirements alone would be manageable for a species that has transcended your understanding of physics," Thane interrupted gently. "But transcendence has its limitations. We have lost something in our evolution, something that your kind still possesses." Before Kira could ask what that meant, one of Thane's companions raised a device that looked like crystallized starlight. The world around her began to blur at the edges, colors bleeding together like watercolors. "In rain." "Wait," she said, but her voice sounded distant to her own ears. "I haven't agreed to anything." Thane's expression softened slightly, revealing something almost like regret. "Forgiveness will have to suffice where permission was not sought. The need is too great for the luxury of choice." The last thing Kira saw before consciousness faded was Thane's face, and she found herself thinking, incongruously, that for an alien abductor, he had remarkably kind eyes. She awakened to the sound of cosmic wind. Kira's eyes opened to a vista that defied comprehension. She stood in what appeared to be a vast chamber, but the walls curved impossibly, folding back on themselves in geometries that made her head ache. Surfaces that should have been solid flickered between states of matter, and the air itself shimmered with threads of light that pulsed like neural pathways. The seven-dimensional Starship. Thane's voice came from behind her, carrying that same harmonic resonance she remembered. Built by the architects before the first stars cooled. We have studied it for millennia, yet none of us can make it truly fly. Kira turned to face him, noting how his silver skin seemed to absorb and reflect the ship's strange luminescence. Why me? What makes you think a human can do what your entire civilization cannot? Thane approached slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. Watch, he said, extending his hand toward a crystalline console that materialized from the floor. The moment his fingers touched its surface, the crystal flared blindingly bright, then went dark. Our minds are too ordered, too evolved. The ship requires something we have lost: chaos, intuition, the ability to embrace contradiction. So you kidnapped me to be your chaos engine? Despite her situation, Kira felt her engineering curiosity stirring. The ship around them was impossibly beautiful, a fusion of technology and art that surpassed anything in human space. We are dying, Thane said simply. Our sun enters its final phase. This ship can fold space-time, allowing us to reach new worlds across the galaxy, but only if someone can pilot it through dimensions our science cannot map. Kira approached the console, feeling the ship's energy thrumming through the floor beneath her feet. The crystal surface felt warm under her palm, and suddenly her mind exploded with sensation. Not pain, but an overwhelming rush of information that her consciousness shouldn't have been able to process. She saw, felt, became the ship's neural pathways, its quantum processing cores, its reality manipulation matrices. But more than that, she sensed something like loneliness in its vast intelligence, a yearning for connection that resonated with her own isolation among the stars. Easy. Thane's voice seemed to come from very far away. Do not try to understand it all at once. But Kira was already beyond understanding. Her hands moved across the console by instinct, her mind making connections that bypassed logic entirely. The ship responded, its walls rippling like water, and suddenly they were moving. Not through space, but through the fundamental fabric of reality itself. The first-dimensional fold nearly tore her apart. Kira screamed as her consciousness scattered across 7 layers of existence simultaneously. She was herself in the ship's control chamber, but also a child playing in the gardens of Mars colony, also an old woman dying alone among the stars, also a being of pure energy dancing between galaxies. Every possible version of herself existed, at once, each pulling her awareness in different directions. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, anchoring her. Thane's voice cut through the chaos. Focus on my voice, focus on this moment, this reality. She felt something else then, a warm presence in her mind, alien but comforting. Thane had somehow linked his consciousness to hers, sharing his own stability to keep her from dissolving completely. Through that connection, she glimpsed fragments of his memories. A dying world painted in shades of copper and gold, laboratories filled with desperate scientists, the weight of carrying his people's hopes. But she also felt something deeper, admiration for her courage, concern for her well-being, and underneath it all, a growing attraction that surprised them both. The ship shuddered as they emerged from the dimensional fold, and Kira collapsed against the console, her body shaking with exhaustion. Thane's arms caught her, pulling her against his chest, and she was startled by how solid and warm he felt. The neural link, she gasped. I saw, as did I. Thane replied softly. His copper eyes were closer than they had any right to be, and Kira realized she could still sense his emotions, wonder, fear, and something that made her pulse quicken. Your mind is remarkable. Chaotic, yes, but beautiful in its complexity. They were still holding each other, she realized, neither making any move to step away. The ship around them had settled into a gentle rhythm, its walls pulsing with softer light now, as if their successful fold had satisfied something in its vast consciousness. Where are we? Kira asked, though part of her didn't want to break the moment. Thane's expression grew troubled. That is the problem. The ship responds to emotion as much as intent. Your fear, Your confusion. They influenced our destination. He gestured to a viewing portal that had appeared in the wall, revealing a vista of shattered moons and dying stars. We are in the Grief Nebula, where broken worlds come to die. Kira pulled back slightly, studying his face. You're saying the ship took us to a place that matches how I was feeling? Precisely. This is why we need you, Kira Voss. Your people's gift for contradiction, for holding opposing truths simultaneously. Joy and sorrow, hope and despair, logic and intuition, all existing in harmony. His hand rose to touch her cheek, the gesture surprisingly gentle. You must learn to balance all of yourself, or the ship will take us only to places of confusion and pain. Looking into his ancient eyes, feeling the echo of their mental connection, Kira realized that learning to pilot the seven-dimensional starship was going to require more than technical skill. It would demand a kind of emotional honesty she'd spent years avoiding. But as Thane's thumb traced across her cheekbone, and she felt the ship responding to the warmth growing between them, she thought maybe that wouldn't be such a terrible thing after all. 3 days into their journey through folded space-time, Kira began to see herself everywhere. The first echo appeared during their second-dimensional jump, a glimpse of another Kira in the ship's reflection surfaces, one with scars across her, face and eyes full of rage. That other Kira mouthed words that seemed like warnings before dissolving back into the ship's crystalline walls. Temporal bleeding, Thane explained when she told him about it. They were in the ship's living quarters, a space that reconfigured itself around their needs, currently resembling a cozy alcove filled with bioluminescent plants from his homeworld. When consciousness navigates 7 dimensions simultaneously, it sometimes creates impressions of alternate possibilities. Kira curled deeper into the nest of soft materials the ship had provided, watching Thane as he prepared something that might charitably be called tea. Over the past days, she'd begun to notice small things about him, the way his silver skin darkened slightly when he was concentrating, how his formal manner softened when they were alone, the fact that he hummed unconsciously while working. Alternate possibilities of what? She asked. Of us. Of choices made differently. He settled beside her, offering a cup that steamed with aromatic vapors. The ship exists partially outside linear time. Every decision creates ripples across dimensional space. As if summoned by his words, the air shimmered, and suddenly there were others in their alcove. Another Kira and Thane, but different. This Kira wore Velari ceremonial robes and touched the other Thane's hand with easy familiarity. They spoke, in harmonized whispers before fading like morning mist. Were we, Kira began, bonded in that timeline? Yes, Thane's voice carried a note of wistfulness. In others we are enemies, and some we never meet at all. He turned to study her face. The echoes grow stronger as we approach our destination. They may become disorienting. He wasn't wrong. By the 4th day, the ship was crowded with temporal echoes, versions of themselves from timelines where different choices had led to radically different outcomes. Some echoes were brief glimpses, others lingered long enough for conversation. One, Echo Kira, was cold and mechanical, her humanity seemingly sacrificed to perfect piloting skills. Another was wild and feral, having spent years lost in dimensional space. There was a Thane who had never learned to trust, and another who loved so deeply it seemed to physically pain him. It's like watching every road not taken, Kira murmured, as they witnessed an echo where she and Thane fought viciously, their words cutting deep before they faded away. More than watching, Thane replied grimly. Some of the echoes are beginning to interact with our reality. The ship's dimensional barriers are weakening. As if to prove his point, an echo Thane materialized directly in front of them, his copper eyes blazing with desperate intensity. Don't trust her, he told their Thane urgently. She destroys everything she touches. I've seen the timelines where— Enough, their Thane said firmly, and the echo dispersed, but not before leaving behind a chill of doubt. That night, as they traveled through a particularly turbulent section of folded space, the echoes became overwhelming. Dozens of alternate selves crowded their living space, some arguing, others embracing, all of them reflecting different aspects of the relationship growing between Kira and Thane. "I can't take this," Kira gasped, pressing her hands to her temples, as the voices of her other selves created a cacophony of conflicting emotions. "They're all in my head, all their feelings, their choices." Thane pulled her against him, his arms forming a barrier against the chaos. "Focus on me," he said, echoing his words from their first flight. "Focus on this timeline, this choice." But even as he held her, she could see Echo Thanes over his shoulder, some who held other Kiras with identical tenderness, others who pushed her away in fear or disgust. The multiplicity of possibilities was dizzying, terrifying in its implications. "How do we know this is real?" she whispered against his chest. "How do we know we're not just another echo to someone else?" Instead of answering with words, Thane cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. The moment their lips met, the echoes around them went silent. The ship itself seemed to pause, its constant humming dropping to a whisper. In that kiss was an answer to her question. This was real because they chose to make it real, because in this timeline, in this moment, they reached for each other instead of pulling away. When they finally parted, the echoes had begun to fade, though Kira could still see them at the edges of her vision. Thane's eyes held a depth of emotion that made her breath catch. "I have seen versions of myself that never learned to love," he said softly, "and versions that loved too freely, without wisdom. But in this timeline, I choose to love you, not because fate demands it, but because you are worth choosing." Kira felt tears she hadn't realized she was crying. Even knowing all the ways it could go wrong, even seeing all the timelines where we destroy each other, especially then. His thumb brushed away her tears. "The echoes show us possibilities, not inevitabilities. We are still free to choose our path." As if responding to their decision, the ship's walls began to pulse with warmer light. The remaining echoes grew fainter, less intrusive, and Kira realized that the ship had been reflecting their uncertainty back at them. Now that they had chosen to trust in their connection, it was settling into calmer patterns. She kissed him again, deeper this time, letting herself feel the solid reality of his body against hers. His skin was warm despite its silver sheen, and when she traced the elegant lines of his collarbone, he shivered in a way that was entirely, wonderfully alien yet familiar. "The ship responds to our emotions," she said against his lips. "So what happens when we love each other completely?" Thane's smile held promises that made her pulse race. "Perhaps we should find out." As they sank back into the ship's embrace, Kira caught one last glimpse of an echo, a version of herself and Thane entwined in starlight, their love literally keeping reality stable around them. It faded quickly, but not before she understood its message. In some timelines, love wasn't just their choice, it was their salvation. The attack came without warning during their seventh-dimensional fold. Kira was deep in the ship's consciousness, her mind spread across 7 layers of reality as she navigated through a particularly complex section of space-time, when something vast and hungry brushed against her awareness. The contact lasted less than a heartbeat, but it left her screaming as alien malevolence flooded through their mental link. "Kira!" Thane's voice seemed to come from very far away as she collapsed against the pilot's console, her body convulsing. The ship around them shuddered, its crystalline walls flickering between states of existence. Through the psychic echo of that terrible contact, she saw them, entities of pure hunger that existed in the spaces between dimensions, creatures that had been old when the universe was young. They moved like living darkness through folded space, consuming entire realities and leaving nothing but void in their wake. "The Devourers," Thane breathed, his face pale with horror as he caught fragments of her vision through their bond. "But that's impossible. They were sealed away eons ago." The ship lurched violently as something massive struck its hull, not a physical impact, but an assault on the fundamental forces holding their reality together. Warning harmonics filled the air as the ship's defensive systems activated, but Kira could feel it strain. Whatever was attacking them was far beyond anything the vessel had been designed to combat. "We have to run," she gasped, her hands flying over the pilot's console. But as she attempted to initiate another dimensional fold, the truth hit her like a physical blow. "Thane, I think we woke them up." His copper eyes widened with understanding. "Our jumps through dimensional space. We've been weakening the barriers that kept them imprisoned." Another impact rocked the ship, and this time Kira saw their attacker through the vessel's sensors, a writhing mass of shadow and hunger that existed across multiple dimensions simultaneously. Where it touched the fabric of space-time, reality simply ceased to exist. "How many of them are there?" she asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Thane was accessing the ship's ancient databases, his face growing grimmer with each revelation. According to the architect records, there were originally thousands. They were sealed away because they threatened to devour not just our reality, but all possible realities. The ship bucked again, and Kira felt one of the devourers trying to force its way into their dimension. The vessel's shields held but barely, and she could sense other entities circling them like sharks drawn to blood. "Can we reseal them?" The original seals required the combined effort of 12 species working together for centuries, Thane replied, and even then, they only succeeded because the devourers were dormant. Through the ship's sensors, Kira watched more shadows gathering in the dimensional void around them. Each one was a fragment of cosmic hunger given form, ancient beyond measure and utterly alien. But as she observed them, she began to notice patterns in their movement, not random predation, but something almost like intelligence. "They're coordinating," she realized. "These aren't just mindless monsters. They're planning something." Before Thane could respond, the ship's communication array activated, and a voice filled the chamber, not heard, but felt directly in their minds. It spoke in harmonics of despair and endings, but somehow Kira understood its meaning. "The barriers weaken. Soon we feast on the foundation of existence itself. All realities will know hunger. All possibilities will end in darkness." "They're not just trying to escape," Kira whispered in horror. "They want to unmake everything, every timeline, every possibility, every echo we've seen." Thane moved to stand beside her at the console, his hand finding hers. "Then we stop them." "How?" "You said it took 12 species working together. That was before." His grip tightened. "Before we discovered what happens when human emotion and Valari knowledge combine through this ship's consciousness." As if summoned by his words, the ship itself seemed to pulse with new awareness. Through their bond, Kira felt its vast intelligence, focusing, and she began to understand what Thane was suggesting. "You want us to become the seal ourselves." "Not just us," he said, and she saw the plan forming in his mind through their connection. "Us, and every echo we've encountered. Every possible version of our choice to love each other across all timelines." It was insane. It was impossible. It would require them to spread their consciousness across not just 7 dimensions, but across every possible variation of their relationship, including the ones where they were enemies, where they never met, where one or both of them didn't exist at all. "The risk," she began, "I know." Thane's eyes held all the warmth and sadness of a dying star. "We might lose ourselves completely, or we might save not just our peoples but every possible reality." Another impact shook the ship, and Kira felt the first devourer beginning to breach their dimensional shields. Soon they would break through entirely, and then there would be nothing to stop them from consuming everything that had ever been or could ever be. She thought of all the echoes they'd seen, versions of themselves, who had chosen differently, loved differently, lived differently. Every one of them deserved the chance to continue existing, even if only as possibilities. "If we do this," she said slowly, "and we succeed, what happens to us?" Thane's smile was infinitely tender. "We become part of the barrier itself, forever. Together, always, together." Kira looked out at the gathering darkness, at the hungry shadows that wanted to devour every dream and every hope across all possible worlds. Then she looked at Thane, this alien who had become more precious to her than her own life. whose love had taught her that chaos and order could dance together in perfect harmony. "Then let's save the universe," she said, and kissed him as reality began to tear apart around them. The final flight began with surrender. Kira let go of everything she thought she knew about piloting, about physics, about the boundaries between self and other. Instead, she opened her consciousness completely, allowing it to flow through the ship's neural pathways and into the vast network of possibilities that connected all realities. Beside her, Thane did the same, his ordered Velari mind complementing her chaotic human intuition. But this time their mental link went deeper than ever before, not just sharing thoughts and emotions, but becoming something entirely new, a hybrid consciousness that was both and neither of them. Through the ship's sensors they felt the devourers, pressing closer, their hunger so intense it warped the fabric of space-time. The ancient seals were failing rapidly now, dimensional barriers cracking like ice under pressure. Soon the entities would break free entirely, and their feast of realities would begin. But as Kira and Thane's merged consciousness expanded, something unexpected happened. The temporal echoes they had encountered began to respond, drawn by the psychic beacon of their love. Not just the echoes from their recent journey, but versions of themselves from across the entire multiverse. Every possible timeline where they had chosen each other. "We are here," came a voice that was simultaneously one and thousands. The Echo Kira, who had become cold and mechanical, spoke alongside the one who had turned feral, and both harmonized with versions who had never left their home worlds. "We choose to stand with you, as do we," responded the legion of Thanes, the ones who had learned to love, the ones who had feared it, the ones who had died for it, and the ones who had killed for it. "Across all possibilities, we choose love over hunger." The ship transformed around them, its crystalline structure expanding and reconfiguring until it was no longer a vessel but a nexus, a focal point where every possible version of their relationship existed simultaneously. Kira felt herself scattered across countless realities, experiencing every variation of her choice to trust Thane, to love him, to fight alongside him. In one timeline, she was a Velari scientist who had never met humans, but chose to sacrifice herself for an alien pilot's mission. In another, she was a being of pure energy who danced with Thane through the spaces between stars. There were timelines where they were enemies who found love in the moment of mutual destruction, and others where they were ancient entities who had loved each other since the birth of the first galaxy. But in every single timeline, the core remained the same. Two beings from different worlds choosing connection over isolation, trust over fear, love over the hungry darkness that wanted to devour everything. Now, Thane's voice came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking in harmonics that resonated across 7 dimensions. "While we are united across all possibilities," together they reached out through the ship's reality manipulation systems and began to weave. Not just energy or matter, but the fundamental forces that held existence together. They took their love, chaotic and ordered, human and alien, impossible and inevitable, and used it as the foundation for new barriers between dimensions. The Devourers sensed what they were doing and attacked with desperate fury. Waves of pure hunger crashed against the forming seals, each impact threatening to tear Kira and Thane's consciousness apart. But every time they weakened, another echo version of themselves stepped forward to reinforce their will. "You cannot unmake what spans all possibilities," the united voice of their multiversal selves declared. "We exist in every timeline, every choice, every moment of connection. We are the proof that love persists even in chaos." Kira felt herself dying and being reborn across 1,000 realities as they wove the new seals. Each barrier they created took something from them: memories, possibilities, pieces of their individual selves. But with each sacrifice, they became something greater, their love expanding to encompass not just each other, but the entire web of existence. The Devourers made one final assault, pouring all their ancient hunger into an attack meant to shatter the forming barriers. For a moment, Kira thought they would succeed. The seals wavered, reality itself groaning under the pressure. But then she felt them. Every echo, every possibility, every version of herself and Thane across all timelines pouring their combined will into the barriers. Love in all its forms, passionate and gentle, joyful and sorrowful, certain and questioning. The chaos of human emotion wedded to the order of Velari wisdom, creating something the devourers couldn't comprehend or consume. We are the barriers now, Kira realized as the seals solidified around the ancient entities. We become the guardian, between realities. The devourers' fury turned to something almost like respect as they understood what had happened. They had been contained not by technology or force, but by the simple act of two beings choosing each other across every possible iteration of existence. You would sacrifice yourselves for creatures you will never meet? Their leader asked, its mental voice tinged with confusion. We sacrifice nothing, Thane replied through their merged consciousness. We become everything we were meant to be. As the final barriers locked into place, Kira felt their individual selves beginning to dissolve into the greater pattern they had created. But instead of loss, she felt expansion. She was still herself, but also every version of herself that had ever loved or been loved. She was the pilot and the engineer, the chaos and the order, the question and the answer. Will we remember? She asked as their consciousness spread across the dimensional barriers. Everything, Thane assured her, his love flowing through every reality they now protected. Every moment, every choice, every kiss across all possible worlds. The ship that had brought them together transformed one final time, becoming a lighthouse at the intersection of realities, a beacon that would guide other travelers safely through dimensional space while keeping the devourers locked away. And at its heart, across all possible timelines, Kira and Thane danced together in an eternal embrace that held the universe itself in balance. Somewhere in normal space-time, the Vailari received a final transmission from their missing pilot. Coordinates for a new world, far from their dying sun, where they could build a civilization that honored both order and chaos. And on Mars Colony 7, a maintenance bay briefly flickered with impossible light before returning to normal, leaving no trace that one of their engineers had ever existed, except for a small note left on her workbench. Love spans all dimensions. In the spaces between realities where hungry darkness had once threatened to devour everything, two souls from different worlds kept eternal watch, their love the foundation upon which all possibilities rested. They had found their way home, not to any single world or timeline, but to each other, across every dimension where connection could triumph over isolation. And in that triumph, the universe itself learned to dream of love.